Hello, I'm Michael Matheson. I'm the author of over 100 books, audible books, and online courses. I'm not currently, nor have I ever been employed anywhere as a scientist, but I've always loved science and have always studied the latest scientific breakthroughs just because I've always been curious about the universe we are born into. But most of the time, I like to think of myself as a young, up-and-coming science fiction author. And in my better stories, I do my homework on the World Wide Web before writing the story that might give it some color, a meaningful impact, and credibility. But in some of my earliest scientific research, I stumbled upon something new to most of us, something very intriguing, and something that kept me awake at night. Thus, my book, The Four States of Consciousness. As time goes by, I believe my early analysis of the newly discovered ability of every particle within the subatomic world to exhibit a level of consciousness will be confirmed. Yep, you heard me right. I'm making this bold claim based on a recent discovery of a property in physics that is now confirmed to exist in all particles: entanglements. And it fits the theme of my talk here today, which is how everything in the universe is in constant motion and constantly rising up from the most basic levels to the highest and most complex. Because something as powerful as the force that creates the universe and maintains the flow of energy all throughout is not going to be held down to this almost imperceptible and invisible level of reality. And I will show you how the greatest force in the universe connects everything and binds everything together, just like George Lucas tells us in the movie Star Wars. The force is with us. But before I tell you where this energy comes from, where it goes, and what it does next, and how I can prove it, I have to explain how I arrived at this entire notion. One day, while doing the research for one of my books, I stumbled upon the work done by John Bell in the 1960s, and which has since then been replicated by many others, when it was discovered that electrons and protons, and now even all subatomic particles, right on down to the quarks, can demonstrate something known as entanglements. It's exactly as if these particles end up in relationships with a partner. Just like we humans search around all of our lives for a life partner, a husband or wife, and when we find our significant other and we both agree, we marry. Critics, because they are scientists, will have to call this love by another name, and so they say they are entangled, but I will forever call it a love affair with another particle of its own kind, but of the opposite sex. Well, not exactly the opposite sex, because I'm not going to go down as someone who thinks subatomic particles have sex. No way. But they do partner up with another particle, but with an opposite property. Sounds like sex, right? And like swans, when they partner up, they remain loyal to that partner for life. But in the state of entangled electrons, protons, and probably all subatomic particles, there's such a strong connection between these entangled particles that whenever one of the entangled partners changes their state of spin or any other property, their significant other changes its spin to maintain the opposite correlation, and it does this instantaneously no matter what the distance between them. And in the past couple of years, they've even photographed what this condition looks like. This is the ancient but very familiar Chinese symbol of yin and yang. It describes the unity and duality of nature in an ancient Chinese philosophy. But these are actually two entangled electrons. Pretty amazing, isn't it? We have to ask ourselves, how did they know so long ago what we know today after thousands of people over hundreds of years resolving all of today's laws in physics when they had the answer all along centuries ago? How did they know that? And I also ask the question, how do they, the electrons, know about their partners, whether or not they're alive, how to communicate instantly over any distance, and how to partner up with them in the first place. So it's my theory that these particles can do all of these things only because they are actually conscious beings. You're probably saying to yourself, very interesting, Mike, but any scientist with a Bunsen burner will tell you that though this is an interesting theory, there is no way to test the theory. So wait for it. I believe I have invented that test. But first, I have to detail for you the 4 states of consciousness. Since the discovery of entangled particles, we now know they have consciousness because this is the only explanation of how they can know about the existence of their significant other or about their own properties in relation to their significant other. So the first state of consciousness is the electronic state of consciousness. And it's probably actually what gives the electron its spin momentum, or consciousness is contained in the spin momentum of these things. Now, at this level of physics, spin doesn't really mean that these particles are spinning. Think of it as the potential to spin. It's like in the old song, "The spin is in, but it's that kind of spin I'm in, that old black magic of love." Remember that song? Sung by Louis Prima, Rod Stewart, Frank Sinatra, and many others, and now me. So those are interesting lyrics because Einstein called entanglements spooky action at a distance and didn't believe it. He later had to change his mind and called his skepticism, quote, "the biggest mistake of his career," close quotes. But entanglements, now proven, shows us the first state of consciousness, what I call the electronic state of consciousness. And it starts at this level, the subatomic particle level. But this state of consciousness, like the other 3, will not be held back or imprisoned at this almost imperceptible level. And as we all learned in junior high school, the subatomic particles connect to other particles to create atoms. And today we know that the first type of these very important things that was created in massive quantities was hydrogen, because it is the single greatest element in the universe in terms of quantity. The stars were all created by compressing hydrogen through the immense pressure of gravity, and this is how we get the galaxies and all the planets like the one we live on. But hydrogen requires only 1 proton and 1 electron, as you may recall, and that's the atomic number of 1. And that's how we arrange all atoms on the chart that we call the periodic table. I'm sure you also remember that from junior high school science, right? And so when the proton and electron get together to form any atom or element, the electron, and probably the proton as well, pass up their primary form of consciousness into the atom, because consciousness has no physicality, so it cannot be contained. It has no properties. It's a thing we can observe the results of, but never the actual thing itself, because it's not a thing. It exists on a different plane entirely. As an example, when 1 electron and 1 proton come together, they create a hydrogen atom. And inside all atoms is where the second state of consciousness, or the rotational state of consciousness, is held. This is the spin energy contained inside every atom that has been induced up from the electron spin and proton spin and even the quark spin. And this all gives the atom its spin. But at this level, it's rotational energy, because the spin of the constituent parts make it so. And thus I determine that the atoms all represent the second state of consciousness, or the rotational state of consciousness. And next, as we all learned again in junior high school science, atoms eventually team up to create molecules. The best known example of which is the single most important molecule of all, and that we know as the symbol of H2O. And this stands for 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, thus creating the most unique and powerful basis of all life as we know it, water. So the third state of consciousness is contained within all of the molecules that exist in the universe, and it is induced up from the atoms with all of their rotational energy that combine to form the molecules with what is now seen as their vibrational energy. So the third state of consciousness, or the vibrational state of consciousness, is composed of molecules which are observed to vibrate with a pent-up energy like a spring that releases itself on other molecules so that they can finally combine to create us, the living world. So in our brains is where the third state of consciousness induces the fourth and final state of consciousness through our molecules, what I call the feedback loop. And this is truly a no-brainer, pardon the pun. If you've ever wondered about that tiny little voice in the back of your head that gives you the ability to talk and listen to friends and read and think, that makes judgments about the world, etc., that same consciousness that's taking place as you watch this video comes from the vibrational state of consciousness inside all of your molecules, but very much more concentrated inside your brain and in your heart. And so it is in our brains that the fourth and final state can exist, because our brains are constructed to make sense of all the data coming in from our eyes, ears, nose, fingers and toes, and tongues, and all organized and sorted out to make our perceptions of the world and our reactions to it. I call this the fourth and final state of consciousness, or the feedback loop, because it is our real purpose to provide some kind of feedback to the force that created all of this intentionality. And this final state of consciousness is a closed loop because our brains cannot operate without the electrons that flow in between our neurons and synapses, our brain cells, of which in most of us there are hundreds of billions that create thousands of trillions of connections between them that make up our individual thoughts and unique personality. So it's really the electronic state of consciousness operating inside of our skulls, passing up this fundamental order of consciousness through the rotational, then the vibrational state, and finally into our own consciousness, the feedback loop. So I hope you can see by now that my theory makes life, wherever it is found, and in whatever shape or category, as the total reason for the universe to exist. But consciousness itself has no senses, no eyes, no ears. It has no sense of smell or taste, and it has no way to touch anything like all of us do. But it is smart enough to make things over time that can do all of these magical things, like us. But if this is the purpose of life, then why do we have such a strong tendency to want to destroy it all? This is the part I truly will never understand. But a good scientific mind will tell you, that's a great theory, Mike, but it's untestable and therefore has no value in the scientific method. True, at least partially. However, I recently thought of an experiment that could prove all of this to be 100% accurate, and if so, would have to become part of the scientific method for the next several hundred years. So let's hit it. I've shown you all now how entangled particles can actually know about one another, and if you still don't believe me, just Google it. You may even find the latest evidence of how subatomic particles actually take selfies. So the second question I asked more recently is, if they can know about their significant other, can subatomic particles learn? If we can prove this, then consciousness is established at all levels of the construction of the universe, because learning can only happen among conscious beings. Rocks, for example, can't learn. Trees, because they are alive, probably can and do learn. Rocks, not so much. At least we don't see any evidence of that. The coffee mug you're holding in your hands right now doesn't learn either, right? Unless you give them a mugshot. Huh? Just kidding. Now, I truly do not expect that entangled subatomic particles can learn new tricks. However, for all the reasoning above, I think it's important that we find out, don't you? So in order to find this out, I came up with this simple experiment that could decide the issue. It's a pattern recognition test. You've seen them all throughout your life, in school and even in job applications. They give you a set of numbers like 1, 3, 5, 7, and the question is, what is the next number in this series? Obviously, the answer is 9. So in my subatomic learning experiment, we try to get the entangled partners to show us that they're paying attention and can listen and learn. We spin one partner or an entangled pair one time. We wait 5 seconds or 1 second. The time between spins doesn't matter. We spin one of the partners once and watch the entangled partners spin back because they have to. We wait 5 seconds, spin them twice, wait again for them to answer both times. Wait exactly 5 seconds again, and then spin them 3 times, and wait for the partner to answer 3 times again. And then we spin them 4 times. Wait for the partner to answer 4 times, wait again, spin them 5 times. And then the same way 6 times, and then 7, and then 8, and then 9. And then we stop to see if they spin on their own with the obvious next step in the series of 10 times. If they repeat our sequence in one higher number than the previous spins without our priming them, they have learned. Quantum physicists say that entangled electrons can and have been observed to change their state on their own randomly. So if they do it under these conditions, then they can behave as if they have learned our sequence code. And if this experiment is replicated by several laboratories, several different times and places, we're in. We've proven that subatomic particles can learn. And again, to be honest, I myself don't have the confidence that perhaps I should have that this experiment can work. But maybe there are other experiments devised by far better experimenters who can devise a simple experiment that, like the simple and elegant double slit experiment that proved the electrons can be both waves and particles. Maybe someone will validate me with an experiment that does finally work, and hopefully in my lifetime. And I'm not so egotistical to say that I must turn out to be right, and I'll even go so far as to say I'm probably full of baloney. But what if I'm not full of baloney? What if they do have this ability? What if they can learn? I just keep asking myself that question. What if they can?